Oh my goodness.
That's the best.
These are farsighted, so I can't see anything on the screen.
You need to see our
these are for distance.
Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jason Tucker, and this is WPwatercooler, episode number 333. Today's episode is Mind the Gap. The WordPress, Minding the Gap, the WordPress developer user gap episode. Let's go around the room real quick and get everyone introduced. Let's start with Say. Say, tell us about yourself.
Around the room, around the room. Hey, what's up? I'm here to annoy you. No, my name's Say Reed. You may know that by now if you're a long time watcher of the show. We've been around, it turns out, like 7 years. My name's Say Reed. I make WordPress, teach WordPress, preach WordPress, and right now I'm organizing WordPress in the form of WordCamp Long Beach, which starts technically tonight with its speaker sponsor dinner. What? And heads into the weekend. I'm very excited about our Sunday tracks, which are going to be fire, and including Steve, which has a subtitle of possibly Steve's last WordCamp talk.
Hey, it's good to have goals.
There's like 10 tickets left if you want to come see this amazing experience. Let's just call it that. At Say Reed Media on all the things. Longest intro ever. Thank you.
Not the longest one. Cosper, how about you?
Sup, Cosper, Aquarius. Happy to be here today.
Oh, you at Aquarius too. Check that out.
So mellow.
So mellow. Steve, how about you?
I am Steve Zenger. I'm the founder of Zeek Interactive, and I run the OC WordPress Meetup. And I will be speaking at WordCamp Long Beach on Sunday at 1:30, right after lunch when everybody's in a food coma.
Why I put you there?
Yes. I will wake them back up.
I was like, let's have the fire. Bring the fire after lunch. And no one will leave either because I'm like, you want to hear what he has to say. Anyway, Jason's going to be there too.
I am. I'm Jason Tucker. You can find me over at Jason Tucker on Twitter. My website, jasontucker.blog. And I do this show as one of those shows called WP Blab. We had a lot of fun yesterday talking about marketing your products and services. And go check it out. It was a really fun show, and I really enjoyed it. Feel free to go take a look at that. And this episode is brought to you by ServerPress, makers of the desktop server. Go over to their website over at serverpress.com, where you can learn how to do both Mac and Windows web development using PHP 7. And you can do some really interesting things with internet sharing straight off the computer that you're developing on right there. So go take a look at that over at serverpress.com.
Also, they're really good people. And that matters.
They're really good people.
They're good people, and that matters to me. So I just want to say that. Not just because they sponsor the show. That is irrespective of that. Maybe they're less good people because they sponsor the show. Just kidding. Okay.
So, Minding the Gap. Let's talk a little bit about that.
The screen in my... Okay. Should probably
Weird
hide.
it's weird how reflection...
You need to close a couple of those.
Yeah, I was like,
You need an ad blocker, Say. I don't know what's going on there, but
what is Say surfing today?
close all the things.
So who wants to help us out with defining the developer user gap?
I do.
Go.
Are you shocked? Are we shocked? All right. So I've been wanting to talk about this. We've brought it up, I think, over the last 2 consecutive episodes. But I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time because this is something that matters to me a lot. So this isn't something that I think is really talked about a lot in general, even though it affects all of us all the time. So basically the idea here that we're talking about, the gap that we're talking about, is the gap between where the developers are and where the users are. And the fact that the users have no idea that the developers are over here. And the developers maybe know. Sometimes I wonder. They don't know either. You don't think they know?
No.
They could know. If they thought about it, they could know more than the users could know where the users are, but they don't. So anyway, the point is that we have these 2 integral parts of WordPress, also all of tech. You could talk about this for really a lot of tech, but for WordPress specifically, you have these 2 integral components of the WordPress ecosystem who are on basically different islands. And this is, I think, where you start to see a lot of the friction in the WordPress community and in the WordPress project as a whole. And I think a lot of it has to do with these facts that these two islands have no bridge. We need to bridge the gap. Anyway, that's my thesis statement. Discuss.
Discuss among yourselves.
Discuss among yourselves. I'll just be over here.
Excellent. All right. I guess that's the show.
Yeah. I mean, I have more to say, but I thought I would.
No, go ahead. Yeah. What's the question?
You want me to keep talking? Well,
Yes.
The question is why is one? There's a bunch of questions. Here's all the
Okay.
questions. One, what the hell? Like, why? Why are
what the actual hell or what the hell?
Why are developers so? I understand why users have no idea what the developers are doing. We all know why that is. They don't even know what they're doing, let alone what it is that the developers are doing. My main question is, why are the developers almost seem to be like willfully refusing to acknowledge that users are back there, and almost resentfully, not even resentfully acknowledge that they're there? That's the main question, is why this, I guess, why this refusal to see that? And then I guess what can we do about it to bridge that gap? Like, how do we do this? Like, we obviously need these forward-facing technologies, GraphQL. We've circled back now to static sites. And like we've been telling users for the last 10 years, dynamic sites and things that are moving. And then now all of a sudden the users are like, okay, we got this. We'll do these things. And then the developers are so far ahead of the curve, they've curved back around to a whole nother system. Anyway, those are the problems. What the hell and why the hell and how do we?
So I've got something on this. Developers, the sort of server admins, things like that, tend to be sort of myopic power users. They are trying to eke the most power out of what they're doing, and they tend to be like, why can't I do this? My best friend works in DevOps, and he has a tendency to complain about why doesn't software work the way I expect it to work. Particularly, I think for a while he was using Thunderbird, and he had a very particular way that he wanted Thunderbird to thread his email messages. And I had to listen to him for months complain about there is no email client that threads messages the way I want them to be threaded. And I had to remind him that he wasn't the end user that they were developing that software for.
Yeah, he's an edge case.
User. Yeah, he was an edge case, and a lot of developers are edge cases, and developers build for edge cases in a lot of cases. So
let me think about that for a second. What you just said, like the way you said it was an edge case.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm a developer, so there you go.
And so I think what you just said is absolutely true. Developers tend to focus on very specific edge cases, and it eats up a lot of their time when they're developing because they do have that. They are myopic when it comes to that, right? I see all the time. What's that?
Is it also everything else, not just when it comes to that? They're myopic.
Right.
Myopic happening.
Absolutely, but so let's talk about the other side for a second, because you just sort of defined this gap between the developers and the users, right? Do users even care?
Well, do they care that there's a gap there?
Do they even know? Like, does it even matter from the user's point of view?
I think it absolutely does, because users get the software handed to them and they're like, what is this new feature? What is this new thing? What am I reading about on the internet that says now I have to have a static site instead of a dynamic site? And they're trying to keep up. I mean, even just from an SEO perspective, right? All these things that keep changing. Like, I feel like users are just like running after stuff. And if they're paying attention at all, they're like, okay, I have to get over there constantly. Some users are basically just receiving the software and dealing with it, but there's so much friction there. I mean, Gutenberg is the example, the ultimate example, not even the penultimate example, the ultimate example of this, where, you know, a lot of the impetus behind Gutenberg was to advance the technology, and the users didn't necessarily, you know, see that need, well, they saw that the need was there once maybe they got it, but even still, even now, they're not at that point, right? So like the developers are leading this charge. I would say even more so, like, because Gutenberg was actually kind of delayed. Gutenberg's kind of late. So like, it actually came a lot later than a lot of the more dynamic stuff that's coming. But so like, what?
I was going to say, was it to advance the technology? Was that the goal of Gutenberg, or was it to simplify the UI?
Well, I think it depends on.
Or was that an end result? Was that a byproduct of advancing the technology?
I honestly think it's more of a byproduct of advancing the technology, because if it had been a user-focused thing, it probably would have happened sooner.
Look at it this way, right? Let's say there's
not to get bogged down with Gutenberg, though.
No, I get it, but let's take Gutenberg's a good example. So let's imagine we have a time machine, right? And we've got two users, right? Both coming into WordPress brand new, right? Somebody coming in brand new right now, and somebody coming into WordPress 5 years ago, right? Who has it easier?
Oh, well,
let's say they've never experienced WordPress before. Who has it easier?
I am a pro Gutenberg person, so this is not even a question for me. I think Gutenberg is definitely easier for the user. But
I am as well. So that migration from Tiny MCE or Classic Editor, or whatever you want to call it, to Gutenberg is difficult, right? I'll give you that, right? That migration and that learning curve is difficult. But if I'm brand new coming into WordPress, let's say I've come over from Wix or Squarespace, right? Gutenberg is much easier than using Classic Editor, right? If I'm brand new to the space.
I kind of think that Gutenberg is bastardizing myself, because, like I said, Gutenberg was actually so delayed in its rollout. Like it Wix and Squarespace had block editors, Divi had block editors, Beaver Builder had block editors, like, a good 5 years before that. So maybe that's not a good example, or basically that's not a good example. Speaking now more about where I think what it really comes down to is the developers get bored with the technology that they're dealing with. And instead of necessarily improving that core technology and focusing on that, they're like, ooh, there's a new shiny thing. There's a new language of Java or JavaScript that I want to use. I want to go use Gatsby now. And now they've moved on to this, and the technology that was there isn't getting developed. And just, they're moving on to the next thing in terms of like the next shiny technology language.
So a way to bridge the gap, and going back to Gutenberg, because I actually think your example is a good one. The way to bridge the gap is it is a good one, because ultimately the developers need to understand the goals of the users, right? Business goals, interface goals, right? Ease of use, all that stuff. So Gutenberg is a good example. Whether it was a byproduct or on purpose, the interface became easier, right? That's not typically the case with developers. Developers usually just do, usually is a bad word, right? Some developers build technology for technology's sake, right?
Yes.
Which is no good for anybody. Right?
No.
It's great for the developer, because the developer's learning new skills and new stuff and whatever. And sometimes it's a great distraction, but when it comes down to it, sometimes those great distractions don't become minimal viable products, or even a product in itself, or even a component of an existing one.
And a lot of
if you spend any time on Hacker News, you'll know that most of the things that people create there are just garbage products that nobody ends up using. How many forks? Yeah. How many forks of Bitcoin do we actually need? How many blockchain implementations?
We need all the forks.
How many blockchain implementations do we need? Blockchain is going to save the world, you guys. Like,
that's what I heard 2
years
ago.
Yeah,
right.
All blockchain, everything. But go ahead.
But again, I mean, that's what I consider is the role of a good project manager, a good agency owner, right? There are those roles that can help bridge the gap, where they're actually taking those business objectives and bringing it to the developers. And I've found that if you can explain the business objectives to a developer, right, and sort of and kind of put it in their terms, right, and they have goals to hit, you can bridge that gap, right? It's not easy, right? Developers just if you just set them loose in the wild, right, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of vaporware. That's just how it happens.
I love the word vaporware.
So.
But I mean, yeah, or a fork graveyard.
So does that mean those little?
Can I use that?
Like,
can I use that on Sunday?
So like those little distractions that we were talking about, that I was talking about, and those little like side projects and things like that. When enough people see them, they think, oh, this is the trend. This is where everything's moving. This is what we should be focusing on. And it's like, well, actually, I was just kind of screwing around because I was mad at WordPress that week. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to use this like mustache Gatsby, name a whole bunch of things and throw them all together kind of thing. And this is what I came up with. And so my website runs on it. And then 3 weeks later, you ask that person who has technology ADD and you're like, hey, so what are you using now? And they're like, well, actually, I'm using something totally different now. So
let's talk. I mean, you've brought up Gatsby a couple times because we did talk about it last week. Let's talk about why Gatsby is hot in the news right now, right? Or static site generators. Let's just lump them all. Let's use Gatsby metaphorically and let's lump all static site generators under Gatsby for the purposes of this talk, right? Or of this discussion, right? The reason it's hot is because everybody's focused on their Google page speed score or their site speed. Right, is because that's what's hot in the news, and so that really is addressing that one particular need, right? If Google changes their algorithm next year, and it's not so focused on site speed, Gatsby's not going to be the thing that we're talking about.
I mean, the thing is though. Go ahead.
You say no, please.
I was just going to say, in terms of Gatsby, like everyone, this is that gap part. So the developers start going in this direction, and then they start building these things over here, and then the users are kind of like, maybe it's not even like islands. Maybe it's like a train that like has a long tail that connects it, and like the developers whip this way, and then the users are like, whoop, and like have to like whip around, and they get whipped around by the developers going to these places. And I think
it's quite a metaphor.
I know, I love the analogy. But like maybe that's the problem in terms of, within WordPress and the ecosystem. And this is just something I see coming up all the time. Like even in the push for I don't know what version they're doing it in. I don't think they're doing it in the next version, but the push to auto upgrade old versions of WordPress from anything that's before 3 point whatever to auto upgrading, that's for developers. That's not for users. Like I just got a message yesterday from a friend who's referring another friend who's like, hey, my friend logged into his website and he just realized, by the way, everything got messed up because there was an auto update. And I was like, oh, did your site update to 5.0? And he's like, yeah, I guess. And I'm like, cool, I can help you with that. So this is the point, right? Like the users are even behind in terms of time, right? Like this guy has a website, it's over there, he's using it, but he's not like a power user or logging in every day or whatever. But then he does log in, and the thing is just like, chaos monkey. And then it's because it's like, these are the things that you need, and not thinking about the user experience. And, the conversation around that auto upgrade has been totally led by developers. There's no user voice there at all.
So when you said this is for developers, not for users, Casper made a face, and I kind of had the same reaction to that, right? Casper, I'll let you go, but I'm gonna react to that in a minute.
Roll him up. Let him.
No, I mean it is for the users who still want to get updates. Who want to continue keeping their site secure, the update is for users. I understand how a lot of the conversation is happening amongst developers, but I really feel like, in the interest, and yes, it simplifies the amount of work that developers have to do when backporting security fixes. okay, now they take basically 10 versions of WordPress that they don't have to backport security fixes to. But that actually frees developers up to work on hopefully more user-focused things.
That's what they're going to work on. They're totally going to go work on more user-centric.
But Casper, you said it very quickly, right? And I want to highlight something there, right? It is for users because it's in their best interest, but they don't know that, right? This is in their best interest.
That's the gap.
That's the gap.
That's the gap. Because it is in their best interest, but they're not even being told that it is happening. Or it's happening before they get told, right? And developers are like, they're just gonna adjust. They're just gonna deal with it. They'll call somebody, someone's gonna do something about it. And then the users are like, why am I on this ride? This is like a terrible ride. And the users are just reacting to everything all the time.
Yeah, really what you're talking about is communication, right?
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good, but we've got a communication gap.
Well, I mean,
nobody's managing expectations.
I mean,
yeah.
I know that's how I feel that was the main problem with Gutenberg, was not the technology. It was the communication that was happening between the developers, users, and the community in general.
That never happens in tech. That never happens.
Well, that's right? So even that's the gap, users, maybe without that third concept of the product manager or the agency owner or whatever, or the project manager, whoever's not bridging that gap. That's what I'm talking about with bridging the gap, right? Because they really are in different camps and they really do have different focuses. And honestly, developers and users have different ways of looking at the world. They have different brain setups. I pride myself on being able to speak both developer and user. I actually feel like I am fluent in those languages. And that to me feels like just because I grew up, because my brother's a developer and he's been talking down to me since I'm 12. So I learned how to speak. How to speak developer. True story. But most, users, even if they're talking to the developer that they've hired, they're like, yeah, whatever you just said, cool. I have no idea what it was. It kind of went over my head, but I trust you. So that's great. And then users are trying to communicate their needs to the developer, and the developer's like, yeah, you don't need that. Let's build this shiny thing. That's what I'm going to do.
I'm gonna correct one thing you said, is that I don't think they say I trust you. I don't think that's ever said, right? I think because there's a communication gap, there is also a trust gap, right? And so because developers, they're not doing it, none of this is necessarily done, it's not mean-spirited, right?
No.
It's not meant to, it's not meant to be bad, but because there's no communication, right? There's a trust issue, right? Users thinking developers are just doing stuff to just because, right? Because they're into technology. It's not in my best interest.
Developers communicate with developers a different way than users communicate with users. And so what ends up happening, and especially SaaS products that we use at my work, you'll have a pop-up that comes up first thing in the morning. A pop-up comes up saying, hey, just let you know, here's all the things that were changed in the software last night when we did our build or whatever. And the user goes, click, didn't even look at it. Just get that out of my way. Me on the other hand, I was looking at what's going on here? How do I make the message of the day pop up again? And they're like, I don't want to look at that. So it makes it really difficult for a developer to communicate with the user in the long run, because we're expecting them to go and say we're expecting them to read all the things that show up on the screen. I am so surprised that people show up from the dashboard, looking at the dashboard, and show up at a meetup, literally get in their vehicle and drive to a place to learn about WordPress because a thing shows up on the screen. I mean, that right there just shows you that they found that one thing that finally works to get the user to actually get involved in the thing. But there's other places where we put pop-ups all over the place trying to get them to look at stuff.
The reason people respond to that is because they need to go talk to someone in person, because the Google articles, or whatever you find on Google, and the change logs, they don't make sense to the user. None of these change logs, they're like, I don't know what any of that means. You could put change logs there all day. it means nothing to people. And that's the same part of the problem, right? Like
right.
that box that pops up for your users at your work, it might as well be in like, Cyrillic or like in
but that's what that goes back to what Steve said, is that they don't trust the developers because of the fact that these pop-ups come up, or these other things. There's other ways of doing this as well, where something comes up and says like, hey, you need to do a thing, and they go, I don't trust this. And we put up a lot of things that people don't trust. Like I work with an older gentleman at my work that he gets phone calls all day long from the IRS wanting to take away his social security number, and the police are going to show up, and the magistrate is going to do whatever. And I'm just listening to these, like, he plays it in the other room, and he starts laughing, and he goes, if I was like 10 years older, I'd be all over this, but nope, not this time. So we've set up these walls, and we set up these ways where people aren't trusting the developers, and they're not trusting the technology. And when you have a robot call you up and say that they're going to take away your social security number, you're not trusting robots anymore. And the code that we're building is essentially robots that they need to look at.
As a general rule, you shouldn't trust robots anyway.
It's true.
Honestly, I would argue, I definitely think that, especially over the past 2-3 years, the trust in any of these systems has gone down. It used to be blind trust. I'll click on the thing, PayPal sending me something, sure, I'll log in, whatever. And I think it's actually a really good thing that lack of trust has actually been raised somewhat, because there should be some thought process and suspicion there. But I would actually argue that users are actually extremely trusting of the software that they get, the developers that they hire. And I see that over and over, because these users feel burned, and they buy a software and it's like, but it told me it was going to do all this stuff, and then it doesn't do this stuff, and they're like, disappointed. They don't actually, because they're just like, sure, I'm going to read this marketing text and I'm just going to trust that it's going to do what I need to do. Or if they load a theme and they're like, yeah, this theme looks really good, and then they load it, they're only not trusting after they've been burned, 5 to 10 times. But at the outset, they are very trusting. And I think that's really sad, honestly, that relationship and dynamic has developed, that users are now like, whatever, I'm just going to go to, honestly, it's part of what drives people to more closed source systems like Squarespace and Wix and stuff, because they're like, I can't make all of these choices all the time, because I can't constantly be evaluating these things, and it's a lesser product. It's a lesser thing. And there's even great support there either. My business partner used to have a Squarespace site, and they locked her out of her email randomly, a couple weeks ago, and she couldn't get anyone to even email her back for like a week, but like the trust has been eroded. So maybe the islands had a bridge. Maybe it was like Pangea at one time. I'm just gonna keep up with the end now.
Wait, we all developers started out as users. We evolved in a different way and ran off with it. I think so.
Developers.
The first time I pick up a new technology, I am currently the user, and then as I exceed its expectations and figure out how to actually use it the way I want to use it, I become the developer side of it. I want to start tinkering with it.
I'm with Say. I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah,
really?
I don't know.
I honestly think that you, Jason, personally, and I'm sure there's tons of people like you experiment, you use things, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to take this apart and tinker with it and see what I can get into with that. But I think a lot of developers, well, even if they ever started out as a user, they almost have contempt for the user. They're so ignorant. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they need.
And Jason, I'm speaking purely from the agency side, right? So if you're creating custom software, my developers aren't the users, right? And so they're creating for somebody else, right? They're never using the software, right? And so there is a big gap there.
I see that all the time in plugins and everything. It's like, if the people who even make a lot of the plugins or make core software were actually using it for the reasons that they are using it for, like, this would be a different conversation. Like even in Gutenberg with the slash, writing a slash and then the name of your slash and then the name of the block you want, that's a developer focused kind of
Yeah.
like.
My mom's
It's for a
looking
power
at
user. For a
Yeah,
power user.
exactly. Well, it's not. I mean, it's for a power user, yes, but like even that inclination that you write a slash and then do that, that is a developer-centered,
Yes.
short code. And they're like, here's this easy text short code, and the user's like, I have to type a slash. That means it's code. That means I don't even know
Which slash is there?
and we have the time is up.
Oh
But
no!
I will type the following though. I'll type : WQ and an exclamation mark to make sure that I save this file out, and I'm
You're
gonna
write
quit.
it and quit. Yeah.
I am gonna write and quit. So I want to say thank you very much for all you folks for coming and hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. That was a Vim joke, by the way, or VI.
I got it right away.
Didn't get it, but I'll run with it, even though I didn't get
Talk to y'all later. Make sure you go over to our website at WPwatercooler.com/subscribe. And if you want to leave us feedback, WPwatercooler.com/feedback. Talk to y'all later. You have a good one. Bye-bye.
See you this weekend.
It won't end.
Never ending. We're not actually done.
We're not done. It's not saving. The clicks aren't working.